This is HOA Storytime Central. Let me set the scene fast. I work night shift at a warehouse in Missoula, Montana, which means I sleep during the day, and the last thing I need is someone screaming at my contractor about trespassing while I am trying to get 4 hours of rest before another 12-hour grind. That is exactly what Amy Perez, the neighborhood watch liaison for the Woodland Crossing Design Review Association, decided to do on a Tuesday morning in March. I moved to Missoula 2 years ago because the warehouse job paid well enough to buy a small house, and I thought a quiet neighborhood would be perfect for someone who needs to sleep when everyone else is awake. The Woodland Crossing Design Review Association runs the community like a private police force, and Amy Perez treats every resident like a suspect. I knew the HOA was strict, but I did not know they would come after me for a fence that I had not even built yet. My small business reputation was already at risk because the HOA had been spreading lies about me in the neighborhood group chat, calling me a trespasser and a hazard, and now they were threatening daily fines starting tomorrow if I did not remove a survey stake that proved I was right. The trouble started when I hired a contractor to replace my old chain-link fence with a 6-foot privacy fence. I got the property surveyed, pulled the permits, submitted the design to the HOA, and got written approval 3 weeks earlier. Everything was legal, everything was approved, and I had the paperwork in a tabbed binder to prove it. But the morning my contractor showed up to start work, Amy Perez marched into my side yard, pointed at a survey stake near the property line, and told him he was trespassing and needed to leave immediately or she would call the police. I heard the yelling from inside the house and stumbled out the back door, still half asleep, wearing the same hoodie and cap I had thrown on before crashing. Amy was blocking the gate to the side yard, holding her portable thermal printer like a weapon, and my contractor, a calm older guy named Dave, was standing next to his truck with his hands up like he was being robbed. A landscaping contractor was trimming hedges 2 houses down, pretending not to listen, but I could see him watching the whole thing. Amy turned to me and said, "You can be mad, or you can be compliant. That survey stake is on common property, and you do not have permission to be here. Remove it now, or the association will fine you $500 a day starting tomorrow." I said, "That is my property. I had it surveyed. I have the plat, I have the permits, and I have HOA approval. You signed off on this 3 weeks ago." She said, "The board will back me because they are afraid of me. You think you can just put stakes wherever you want and call it yours? That is not how this works. I am issuing a stop work order right now, and if your contractor touches anything, I will have him arrested for trespassing." She hit a button on the thermal printer, and it started spitting out a notice with a long strip of paper curling onto the ground. No readable text, just a lot of bold lines and boxes. She ripped it off, shoved it at Dave, and said, "You are now officially in violation. Leave, or I call the police." Dave looked at me, and I could see he did not want to get dragged into an HOA war. He said, "I will come back when this is sorted out," and he got in his truck and left. Amy smiled, folded her arms, and said, "You can be mad, or you can be compliant. Your choice." I went back inside, grabbed the tabbed binder with all my paperwork, and came back out. I opened it to the page with the HOA approval letter and held it in front of her face. I said, "This is your signature. You approved this fence. You approved the setback, the height, the style, everything. What changed?" She glanced at it, shrugged, and said, "That approval was conditional on final review, and I am reviewing it now. The stake is too close to the easement, and the board has decided that we need to reevaluate the property line before any work can proceed. You have until tonight to remove the stake, or the fines start tomorrow. After that, It is $500 a day until you comply. I said, there is no easement here. The plat shows the property line, and the stake is 6 inches inside my boundary. You cannot just make up an easement. She said, the board will back me because they are afraid of me. You do not have the authority to question my enforcement. If you want to appeal, you can request a hearing, but the fines start tomorrow either way. She turned and walked away, and I stood there holding the binder, realizing that I had 24 hours to figure out how to stop this before I started hemorrhaging money I did not have. I called the county surveyor and asked if there was any easement on my property. He pulled up the plat, checked the records, and said, no easement. Your property line is exactly where the stake is. If someone is claiming otherwise, they need to provide documentation. I called the city planning office and asked if the HOA could override a surveyed property line. The clerk said, no. The HOA can regulate fence design and aesthetics, but they cannot change property boundaries. If they are claiming an easement, they need to show you the recorded document. I called my contractor and told him what happened. He said, I have worked in this neighborhood before. Amy Perez does this all the time. She targets people, makes up violations, and the board backs her because they do not want to deal with her. I have seen her shut down 3 projects in the last year, and 2 of them ended up in court. If you want to fight this, you need to document everything. I asked, what do you mean document everything? He said, record every conversation. Save every email. Get witnesses. And whatever you do, do not take that stake out. If you remove it, she will say you admitted you were wrong, and you will never win. I spent the rest of the day gathering evidence. I printed the approval letter, the survey plat, the permit application, the county records, and a copy of the HOA bylaws that showed the limits of enforcement authority. I put everything in the tabbed binder, with color-coded tabs for each section. I also set up my phone on a tripod in the side yard, aimed at the property line, just in case Amy came back. That night, I got a text from a neighbor named Eric who lived next door. He was a calm, quiet guy who kept to himself, but he had seen the confrontation that morning and wanted to help. He said, I have lived here for 8 years, and I have watched Amy do this to at least 6 people. She targets anyone who does not kiss the ring, and the board lets her get away with it because they are afraid of her. If you need a witness, I will back you up. I thanked him and asked if he had seen anything unusual about the property line. He said, I was here when the previous owner put up the chain link fence, and it was on the same line as your stake. Amy is making this up because she does not like you. The next morning, I woke up to find another notice zip-tied to my mailbox. It said that I was now in violation for failure to comply, and that daily fines of $500 would begin immediately. It also said that the HOA was placing a hold on my account, and that I could not make any payments until the violation was resolved. I knew exactly what that meant. They were refusing to accept payments so they could charge me late fees for the refusal. I took a photo of the notice, added it to the binder, and called the HOA management company. I got a receptionist who said that Amy Perez was the enforcement officer for my section, and that all violation disputes had to go through her first. I said, she is the one who issued the violation. How am I supposed to dispute it with her? The receptionist said, you can request a hearing with the board, but you need to submit a written request, and the next available hearing is in 6 weeks. I said, the fines start today. I cannot wait 6 weeks. She said, then you need to comply with the violation and remove the stake. I said, the stake is on my property. I have a survey that proves it. She said, The board will review your evidence at the hearing. Until then, the fines are in effect. I hung up and called a lawyer. I got a consultation with a real estate attorney named Lisa Chen, and I explained the situation. She said, "This is a classic HOA shakedown. They issue a bogus violation, refuse to let you appeal, and pile on fines until you either give up or pay them to make it go away. The good news is that they are making a lot of mistakes, and if you document everything, you can turn this around." She said, "First, do not remove the stake. That is your evidence. Second, keep records of every interaction. Third, get witness statements from anyone who saw the confrontation. Fourth, request the hearing in writing and make sure you copy every board member on the email. That creates a paper trail that shows they are stalling. And fifth, get a city inspector out there to confirm the property line. If the city says you are right, the HOA has no case." I asked, "What about the fines?" She said, "Do not pay them. If you pay, you are admitting the violation is valid. Let them pile up, and then we will use them as evidence of retaliation when we file a complaint." I thanked her, hung up, and immediately sent an email to the entire HOA board requesting a hearing. I attached the survey plat, the approval letter, the county records, and the photo of the notice. I copied the management company, Eric, and my contractor. I said, "I am formally requesting an emergency hearing to dispute the stop work order and the fines issued by Amy Perez. The survey plat clearly shows that the stake is on my property, and the approval letter shows that this project was authorized by the HOA. I am requesting that the fines be voided and that the stop work order be lifted immediately." Within an hour, I got a reply from Amy. She said, "Your request for a hearing has been received, but the board does not grant emergency hearings for routine compliance issues. Your hearing will be scheduled in the normal rotation, which is currently 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the fines remain in effect, and you are required to remove the stake by end of business today or face additional penalties." I replied, "The stake is on my property, as shown in the attached survey plat. I am not removing it. If the HOA believes otherwise, please provide documentation of the easement you claim exists." She replied, "The board does not need to provide documentation to enforce compliance. You are in violation, and the fines will continue until you comply." I forwarded the entire email chain to Lisa Chen, and she said, "Perfect." She just admitted in writing that they have no documentation and that they are enforcing a rule they cannot prove. Save that email. We are going to use it. That afternoon, I called the city planning office and requested an inspection. I explained the situation, and they sent an inspector out the next day. His name was Mark, and he was a no-nonsense guy with a clipboard and a tape measure. He looked at the survey plat, looked at the stake, looked at the fence line, and said, "This stake is exactly where it should be. Your property line is clear, and there is no easement here. If the HOA is claiming otherwise, they need to show me a recorded document. I do not see one." I asked, "Can you put that in writing?" He said, "I will send you a copy of the inspection report. It will say that the stake is on your property and that no violation exists. If the HOA finds you after that, they are opening themselves up to liability." Mark handed me a business card and said, "If they keep pushing this, call me. I will be happy to testify that they are wrong." I thanked him, and as soon as he left, I got another text from Amy. She said, "I saw the city inspector at your property. That does not change anything. The HOA has independent authority to enforce setbacks and easements, and the city cannot override our rules. The fines are still in effect, and you are now at $1,000. Remove the stake, or we will place a lien on your property." I took a screenshot, added it to the binder, and replied, "The city inspector confirmed that the stake is on my property and that no easement exists. I am not removing it, and I am not paying the fines. I am requesting an immediate hearing to resolve this issue." She did not reply. The next day, I woke up to find a post in the neighborhood group chat. It was from Amy, and it said, "Attention residents. We have a compliance issue on Sycamore Lane where a homeowner has placed unauthorized survey markers on common property and is refusing to remove them. This is a safety hazard and a violation of our community standards. Please be aware that the HOA is taking enforcement action, and we ask that you report any similar violations immediately." She did not name me, but everyone in the neighborhood knew exactly who she was talking about. Within an hour, I got 3 texts from neighbors asking what was going on, and one of them said, "Amy told me you damaged common property and that you owe the HOA money. Is that true?" I replied, "No. I had my property surveyed, and the stake is on my land. The city inspector confirmed it." Amy is making this up. Eric saw the post and replied in the group chat, "I live next door, and I can confirm that the survey stake is on his property. The previous owner had a fence on the same line. This is not a safety hazard, and it is not a violation. The HOA is targeting him for no reason." Amy immediately kicked Eric from the group chat. I called Eric and said, "Thank you for backing me up." He said, "I am done with her. She has been running this neighborhood like a dictator for 3 years, and no one stands up to her because they are afraid of retaliation. If you need me to testify at the hearing, I will do it." I said, "I might need more than that. I am thinking about emailing the inspection report to every homeowner in the neighborhood so they can see what is happening." He said, "Do it. People need to know." That night, I drafted an email to every homeowner in the Woodland Crossing Design Review Association. I attached the survey plat, the approval letter, the city inspection report, and the email chain with Amy. I said, "I am writing to inform you that the HOA is currently fining me $500 per day for placing a survey stake on my own property. The city inspector has confirmed that the stake is on my land and that no violation exists. Despite this, the HOA has refused to lift the stop work order and is threatening to place a lien on my property. I am sharing this information because I believe the HOA is engaging in selective enforcement and is violating my rights as a homeowner. If you have experienced similar issues, I encourage you to speak up." I hit send and waited. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmare stories. Within 24 hours, I got replies from 11 homeowners. 6 of them said they had been targeted by Amy for bogus violations. 3 of them said they had paid fines just to make her go away. 2 of them said they had tried to fight back and lost because the board always sided with Amy. 1 of them said, "She is running a community safety committee like a private police force with no authority, and the board lets her do it because they do not want to deal with her." I added all the replies to the binder and sent a follow-up email to the board saying, "I have received multiple reports from other homeowners who have been targeted by selective enforcement. I am requesting that the board conduct an audit of all violations issued in the last 2 years and review the enforcement process to ensure it is being applied fairly." Amy replied within minutes, "You do not have the authority to request an audit. Your hearing is scheduled for 6 weeks from now, and the fines remain in effect. If you continue to harass board members, we will pursue legal action." I forwarded the email to Lisa Chen, and she said, "She is panicking. She knows you have her cornered, and she is trying to intimidate you into backing down. Do not respond to her. Let her keep digging. 2 days later, a utility marker appeared near the property line. It was a small orange flag on a wire stake, and it had no label. I had no idea where it came from, but Amy saw it and immediately sent me an email saying, "The utility marker near your property line confirms that the area is within the easement. You are now required to remove both the survey stake and the utility marker, or the fines will double." I called the utility company and asked if they had placed a marker in my yard. They said, "We have no record of any work orders in your area. If there is a marker, it was not placed by us." I took a photo of the marker, added it to the binder, and replied to Amy, "The utility company has confirmed that they did not place this marker. If you know who placed it, please provide that information. Otherwise, I am treating it as vandalism and reporting it to the police." She did not reply, but the next day, the marker was gone. That same afternoon, I got a call from Dave, my contractor. He said, "I just got a call from Amy Perez. She told me that if I start work on your fence, she will report me to the state licensing board for trespassing and fraudulent permits. She also said that she has connections with other HOAs in the area, and that if I work for you, she will make sure I never get another contract in Missoula." I said, "She is bluffing. You have permits, you have approval, and the city inspector confirmed that the property line is correct. She has no legal basis to report you." He said, "I know, but I cannot afford to take the risk. I have a family, and I cannot lose my license over an HOA dispute. I am sorry, but I am out." I understood, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. I had no contractor, I had fines piling up, and Amy was actively sabotaging my ability to get the work done. I called Lisa Chen and told her what happened. She said, "That is tortious interference. If she is threatening your contractor to prevent you from completing a legal project, that is a separate cause of action. Document everything, and we will add it to the complaint." She said, "Here is what we are going to do. We are going to file a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission for HOA misconduct. We are going to request an emergency injunction to stop the fines. And we are going to demand a hearing in front of a neutral arbitrator, not the HOA board. If they refuse, we will take them to court." I said, "How much is this going to cost?" She said, "I will do it on contingency. If we win, the HOA pays my fees. If we lose, you do not owe me anything. But I do not think we are going to lose. They have made too many mistakes." I agreed, and she started drafting the complaint. That weekend, I got a knock on my door. It was Amy, and she had 2 board members with her. One of them was the board president, a nervous-looking guy named Dale, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. The other was the treasurer, a woman named Linda who kept glancing at Amy like she was waiting for permission to speak. Amy said, "We are here to offer you a settlement. If you remove the survey stake and agree to move the fence 6 inches further onto your property, we will void the fines and allow the project to proceed." I said, "The fence is already 6 inches inside my property line. If I move it another 6 inches, I will be giving up part of my yard." She said, "That is the compromise. You can accept it, or the fines continue and we place a lien on your property." I said, "No." Dale cleared his throat and said, "Look, we just want to resolve this. Amy thinks the stake is too close to the easement, and if we can move it a little bit, we can all move on." I said, "There is no easement. The city inspector confirmed it. The county surveyor confirmed it. The plat confirms it. If Amy thinks there is an easement, she needs to show me the recorded document." Amy said, "The board does not need to provide documentation to enforce compliance. You are in violation, and you need to fix it." I said, "Then I will see you at the hearing." Linda started to say something, but Amy cut her off and said, "You are making a mistake. The board will back me because they are afraid of me. You cannot win this." I said, "We will see." They left, and I immediately called Eric and told him what happened. He said, "That was a setup. They were trying to get you to agree to something on the record so they could use it against you later. Good thing you said no." I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the hearing. I organized the binder, printed extra copies of all the documents, and practiced my presentation. I also reached out to the other homeowners who had been targeted by Amy and asked if anyone would be willing to speak at the hearing. 3 of them agreed. The night before the hearing, I got an email from my contractor. He said, "I just got an email from the Woodland Crossing Design Review Association Management Company. It was forwarded to me by accident, and I think you need to see it." He attached the email, and I opened it. It was from Amy to the management company, and it said, "I need you to schedule the hearing for next week and make sure Dale and Linda are there to back me up. The homeowner has been gathering evidence, and I need to shut this down before it gets out of hand. Make sure the minutes reflect that the board voted to uphold the violation. I do not care what the homeowner says, we are not backing down." I read the email 3 times, and then I forwarded it to Lisa Chen. She replied, "That is the trump card." She just admitted in writing that she told the board to back her up regardless of the evidence. That is fraud, and it proves that the hearing is rigged. Forward this to every homeowner in the neighborhood right now. I acted like I was backing down, because timing was the whole weapon. I did not reply to Amy. I did not say anything in the group chat, and I did not let anyone know I had the email. I waited until the day of the hearing, and then I emailed the vendor email admitting Karen told them to ignore my approved application to every homeowner in the Woodland Crossing Design Review Association with the subject line, "The Truth About Selective Enforcement." I said, "This email was forwarded to me by a contractor who was accidentally copied on an internal communication from Amy Perez. As you can see, she instructed the management company to schedule the hearing and told the board to uphold the violation regardless of the evidence. This is proof that the hearing is rigged and that the HOA is engaging in selective enforcement. I am sharing this with you because I believe you have a right to know how the association is being run." I hit send at 5:00 p.m., 2 hours before the hearing, so that everyone would see it before the meeting started. By the time I arrived at the community center for the hearing, there were 25 homeowners in the parking lot. Eric was there, along with the 3 homeowners who had agreed to speak, and at least 10 others who said they had come to watch. One of them said, "That email is insane." I cannot believe she actually wrote that down. I walked into the meeting room with the tabbed evidence binder under my arm and the roll of caution tape looped over one wrist like a reminder of what this fight was really about. Amy was already seated at the front table with Dale and Linda, and she looked calm and confident until she saw the crowd behind me. Her face went pale, and she leaned over to whisper something to Dale. Dale called the meeting to order and said, "We are here to review the violation issued to the homeowner at Sycamore Lane regarding unauthorized survey markers and failure to comply with HOA easement regulations. The homeowner has requested a hearing to dispute the fines and the stop work order. We will hear from both sides, and then the board will vote." I stood up and said, "Before we begin, I would like to enter into the record the email that was sent by Amy Perez to the management company instructing the board to uphold the violation regardless of the evidence. I have copies for everyone." I handed out the email, and the room went silent. Dale read it, and his face turned red. Linda read it, and she put her hand over her mouth. Amy sat perfectly still, staring at the table. Dale said, "Where did you get this?" I said, "It was forwarded to me by a contractor who was accidentally copied on the email. It is a vendor email admitting Karen told them to ignore my approved application, and it proves that this hearing is rigged." Amy stood up and said, "That email is taken out of context. I was simply coordinating with the management company to ensure that the hearing was scheduled properly." I said, "You told the board to back you up regardless of the evidence. That is not coordination. That is fraud." Eric stood up and said, "I have lived in this neighborhood for 8 years, and I have watched Amy target at least 6 homeowners with bogus violations. She does this all the time, and the board lets her get away with it because they are afraid of her. This email proves what we have all known for years." One of the other homeowners stood up and said, "I paid a $2,000 fine last year for a fence violation that was never explained. I asked for documentation, and Amy told me the board did not need to provide it. I paid because I could not afford to fight, but now I know I was scammed." Another homeowner stood up and said, "I was fined for parking my truck in my own driveway because Amy said it was an eyesore. The bylaws do not say anything about parking restrictions, but she threatened to tow my truck if I did not move it. I moved it, and I still got fined for being uncooperative." Dale held up his hand and said, Okay, everyone calm down. Let us hear from the homeowner first, and then we will discuss the email." I opened the tabbed binder and said, "I have a survey plat that shows the property line. I have an approval letter from the HOA that authorizes the fence. I have a city inspection report that confirms the survey stake is on my property. I have county records that show no easement exists. And I have an email chain where Amy admitted that the HOA has no documentation to support the violation. The fines are fraudulent, the stop work order is illegal, and I am requesting that the board void the fines, lift the stop work order, and remove Amy Perez from enforcement authority." Amy stood up and said, "The board has the authority to enforce setbacks and easements, regardless of what the city says. The homeowner is in violation, and the fines are valid." I said, "Then show me the recorded easement document." She did not reply. Dale looked at Linda, and Linda looked at Amy. Dale said, "Do we have a recorded easement document for this property?" Amy said, "The board does not need to provide documentation to enforce compliance." Linda said, "Amy, if there is no recorded easement, then we cannot enforce it. That is basic property law." Amy said, "The board will back me because they are afraid of me." The room went silent. Dale said, "Excuse me?" I said, "She said that in an email to me 2 weeks ago. I have it in the binder. She also said it to me in person. She thinks the board will back her because you are afraid of her." Linda stood up and said, "I am not afraid of you, Amy, and I am not going to let you turn this association into your personal fiefdom. I move that we void the fines, lift the stop work order, and conduct an audit of all violations issued in the last 2 years." Dale said, "I second the motion." Amy said, "You cannot do that. I am the enforcement officer, and I have the authority to issue violations." Linda said, "Not anymore. I move that we remove Amy Perez from enforcement authority and assign all future violations to a neutral third-party reviewer." Dale said, "I second that motion too." Amy stood up, grabbed her portable thermal printer, and said, "You are all making a huge mistake. I quit." She walked out of the room, and the crowd started clapping. Dale called for a vote, and both motions passed unanimously. He said, "The fines are voided. the stop work order is lifted, and we will hire a third-party reviewer to handle all future violations. I apologize for the way this was handled, and I want to assure everyone here that this kind of selective enforcement will not happen again. I get the meeting to vote on the spot after the evidence is read into the minutes, and within 10 minutes, the board had removed Amy Perez from enforcement authority and voided every fine she had issued in the last 6 months. Linda came up to me after the meeting and said, "I am sorry you had to go through this. Amy has been running this neighborhood like a dictator for 3 years, and we should have stopped her a long time ago. Thank you for standing up." Eric shook my hand and said, "You did it. You actually beat her." I said, "We did it. I could not have done this without your help." The next day, I got an email from the HOA attorney. It said, "On behalf of the Woodland Crossing Design Review Association, I am writing to inform you that the enforcement action regarding the survey stake has been removed, and the fines have been voided. The ledger entry has been removed from your account, and you are free to proceed with your fence project." Additionally, the board has instructed me to warn all members about liability if similar selective enforcement occurs in the future. We apologize for any inconvenience. I forwarded the email to Lisa Chen, and she said, "You won." The HOA removes the enforcement action and voids the ledger entry, and they admitted liability. That is a complete victory. I called Dave, my contractor, and told him the news. He said, "I heard. Half the neighborhood is talking about it. When do you want me to start?" I said, "Tomorrow." The next morning, Dave showed up with his crew, and we started building the fence. Eric came over to watch, and he brought coffee. A few other neighbors stopped by to say congratulations, and one of them said, "You are a legend. No one has ever stood up to Amy like that." I said, "She made it easy. She documented everything herself." Eric said, "What are you going to do with the caution tape?" I looked down at the roll of caution tape looped over my wrist and said, "I am keeping it as a souvenir." The fence was finished in 3 days. It was a solid 6-foot privacy fence, exactly where the survey said it should be, and it looked great. I took a photo of the finished fence and posted it in the neighborhood group chat with the caption, "Project complete." Thanks to everyone who supported me. I got replies from 23 homeowners, and most of them said some version of, "Congratulations," or "You deserve it," or "Thank you for standing up to Amy." One of them said, "Amy Perez has been removed from the neighborhood group chat, and the board has announced that all future enforcement will be handled by a neutral third party." This is the best news we have had in years. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from the HOA. It was a formal apology signed by Dale and Linda, and it said, "The Woodland Crossing Design Review Association regrets the selective enforcement and procedural errors that occurred in your case. We have implemented new policies to ensure that all homeowners are treated fairly, and we have hired a third-party compliance reviewer to handle all future violations. We value you as a member of our community, and we appreciate your patience during this process." I framed the letter and hung it in my garage next to the survey plat. A month later, I heard that Amy Perez had moved out of the neighborhood. Eric told me that she sold her house and relocated to Billings. He said, "I heard she is starting a consulting business to help other HOAs with enforcement. God help them." I said, "At least she is someone else's problem now." Eric said, "You know what the funniest part is? The board went back and reviewed all the violations she issued in the last 2 years, and they found that Karen's own selective enforcement gets documented in the minutes. She had targeted 15 homeowners, and 12 of them had been fined for violations that did not exist. The board voided all the fines and issued refunds. You started a revolution. I said, I just wanted to build a fence. He said, yeah, but you did not back down. That is what made the difference. A few weeks later, I was working in the yard when a car pulled up in front of my house. It was Mark, the city inspector. He got out and said, I heard you won your case. Congratulations. I said, thanks. I could not have done it without your report. He said, I am glad it worked out. I wanted to let you know that Karen repeats a threat and everyone hears it on the recording. The HOA sent a copy of the meeting minutes to the city, and when we reviewed them, we saw that Amy Perez had threatened multiple homeowners with fraudulent violations. We have flagged her name in our system, and if she ever tries to pull this in another jurisdiction, we will have a record of it. I said, that is good to know. He said, one more thing. A city inspector confirming what the HOA cannot enforce is going to be part of our training program now. Your case is being used as an example of what happens when an HOA overreaches. So thank you for documenting everything. I shook his hand and said, happy to help. That night, I sat on my back deck and looked at the new fence. It was exactly what I had wanted, and it was worth every second of the fight. The warehouse job was still brutal, and I still needed to sleep during the day, but at least now I could do it in peace without worrying about Amy Perez showing up with a thermal printer and a fake violation. Eric came over with a six-pack, and we sat on the deck and talked about the whole ordeal. He said, you know what the best part is? The board is terrified of another lawsuit, so they are treating everyone like royalty now. I got a violation notice last year from my mailbox, and they just sent me a letter saying it was voided. No explanation. No apology. Just voided. I said, that is because they know they screwed up, and they do not want anyone else to sue. He said, do you think Amy will ever come back? I said, I doubt it. She burned too many bridges, and even if she does, she has no power anymore. The board stripped her of enforcement authority, and the HOA attorney made it clear that they will not tolerate selective enforcement again. Eric said, good, because I was getting tired of walking on eggshells every time I mowed my lawn. We finished the six-pack and talked about anything but the HOA. It felt good to finally move on. A few months later, I got a call from Lisa Chen. She said, I wanted to let you know that the State Real Estate Commission opened an investigation into the Woodland Crossing Design Review Association. They are reviewing the complaint I filed, and they are interviewing other homeowners who were targeted by Amy Perez. If they find evidence of fraud or misconduct, they can fine the HOA and force them to implement corrective measures. I said, that is great news. She said, it is, but I also wanted to warn you that Amy might try to retaliate. She could file a countersuit, or she could spread rumors, or she could try to sabotage your reputation. Just be careful. I said, I am not worried. I have everything documented, and I have witnesses. If she tries anything, I will bury her. Lisa said, that is the right attitude, and if she does try anything, call me immediately. I thanked her and hung up. A week later, I got a friend request on social media from someone I did not recognize. The profile picture was a generic sunset photo, and the name was something generic like Community Watchdog. I ignored it, but then I got 3 more friend requests from similar accounts. I checked the profiles, and they were all brand new with no posts and no friends. I blocked all of them and reported them as spam. Eric texted me and said, did you get any weird friend requests today? I said, yeah, 4 of them. Why? He said, "Same here. I think Amy is trying to spy on us. She probably created fake accounts to see what we are posting." I said, "That is pathetic." He said, "Agreed. But it also means she is still obsessed with this. Be careful." I was not worried. I had nothing to hide, and I was not going to let Amy Perez intimidate me with fake social media accounts. A month later, I got a letter from the State Real Estate Commission. It said, "We have completed our investigation into the Woodland Crossing Design Review Association, and we have found evidence of selective enforcement and procedural violations. The HOA has been fined $10,000, and they have been ordered to implement new policies to ensure fair treatment of all homeowners. Additionally, we have flagged the name Amy Perez in our system, and any future complaints involving her will be subject to enhanced scrutiny. Thank you for bringing this issue to our attention." I framed the letter and hung it next to the HOA apology letter. Eric came over that night, and I showed him the letter. He said, $10,000. That is a lot of money. I said, "It is, and it is all because Amy could not let it go. If she had just admitted she was wrong and voided the fines, none of this would have happened. But she had to double down, and now the HOA is paying the price." He said, "Do you think she knows about the fine?" I said, "I am sure she does. And I am sure she is furious." Eric said, "Good. She deserves it." We sat on the deck and watched the sun set behind the new fence. It felt like the end of a long chapter, and I was ready to move on. A few weeks later, I saw a for sale sign go up at Amy's old house. The new owners moved in a month later, and they were a young couple with a toddler. They seemed nice, and they did not have any interest in HOA drama. Eric and I welcomed them to the neighborhood, and we told them the short version of what had happened with Amy Perez. The husband said, "Wow, that sounds insane. We just want to live in peace and raise our kid." I said, "You picked a good time to move in. The HOA has new policies now, and they are a lot more reasonable." The wife said, "That is good to hear. We almost did not buy here because of the HOA reviews online, but our realtor said things had changed recently." I said, "They have. And if you ever have any issues, let me know. I have been through the process, and I can help." They thanked me, and we all went back to our houses. Over the next few months, the neighborhood settled into a new normal. The HOA hired a professional property management company to handle enforcement, and they implemented a transparent appeals process that included written notices, documented evidence, and neutral third-party reviews. The board met every quarter to review violations, and they published the minutes online so that everyone could see what was happening. Eric got elected to the board, and he made it his mission to ensure that selective enforcement never happened again. He said, "I am going to make sure that every violation is documented, every appeal is heard, and every homeowner is treated fairly. No more Amy Perez nonsense." I said, "You are a hero." He said, "No, you are the hero. I am just cleaning up the mess." A year after the whole ordeal, I got a call from one of the homeowners who had spoken at the hearing. She said, "I wanted to thank you again for standing up to Amy. Because of you, the HOA refunded my $2,000 fine, and I was able to use that money to pay off my credit card. You changed my life." I said, "I am glad I could help." She said, "I also wanted to let you know that I am running for the board next year, and I am going to make sure that the new policies stay in place. We cannot let this happen again." I said, "You have my vote." She said, "Thank you, and if you ever need anything, let me know." I hung up and felt a sense of satisfaction that I had not felt in a long time. The fight had been exhausting, but it had been worth it. I had stood up to a bully, exposed a corrupt system, and forced real change. And I had done it all with a tabbed binder, a roll of caution tape, and the support of neighbors who were just as tired of the nonsense as I was. The fence still stands, solid and straight, exactly where it should be. Every time I look at it, I remember the fight, and I remember the moment when Amy Perez walked out of that meeting room and the crowd started clapping. I remember the vendor email admitting Karen told them to ignore my approved application, and I remember the look on her face when I read it into the record. I remember the city inspector confirming what the HOA cannot enforce, and I remember the board voting on the spot after the evidence was read into the minutes. I remember Karen's own selective enforcement gets documented in the minutes, and I remember the HOA removes the enforcement action and voids the ledger entry. I remember Karen repeats a threat and everyone hears it on the recording, and I remember how the power shifted in that room when people realized that the bully could be beaten. But most of all, I remember that timing was the whole weapon. I acted like I was backing down, because timing was the whole weapon, and when the moment was right, I deployed the trump card and watched the whole system collapse. The Woodland Crossing Design Review Association is a different place now. It is not perfect, but it is fair. And that is all I ever wanted. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all the support.